This afternoon, I'm going to go over what you need to fill out your grant information at annual report time. I'm going to really kind of give you a packet of information that you need to start gathering now so that when next spring rolls around, or really late winter rolls around, you will not go, oh great, where is that information? So you should have a PowerPoint slide, paper that's entitled Program Title, one that's Grant Summary, and then another that's Vendor and Subrecipient titles. To start with, as a heads up to those who didn't have to complete a grant schedule this past year because you didn't expend at least $400,000 in grant money, that will not be a criteria to filling out a grant schedule this coming year. The question that you will have to answer on the annual report will be, do you have grants? Period. And it won't matter if these grants are federal or if they're state. And if you answer yes, you will need to fill out the grant schedule information about these grants, no matter what the dollar amounts are. And since I'm sure that all the counties have grants, you'll all be doing this. Again, I want to go over with you information that you'll need to have available. I also want to provide you the resources and also why this information is necessary. I want you to have this on hand because you will need the cooperation of others, as I'm sure you've discovered, in your county to work with you and provide you the necessary information. And I generally find it's a lot easier for people to provide that information if they understand why and how it benefits them. This also really helps them to prioritize too. I know that you understand how busy they are just as you are. Also, some of you have received audit findings on your grant schedules being materially incorrect and not having a process in place to make sure that your schedules were complete. And while not all of you have had these findings, the questions that Tammy and I received while you were completing your annual report really kind of made it evident that it would be very good for you to have a process that's in place. So I want you to take away from here some ideas on how to make sure that you're accumulating the grant information as well as some elements of a process. To start with, why is it important to have grant information? And of course, it's a requirement of the annual report that you submit to us. All annual report information that we receive is subject to audit and comment in our report if it's not correct. And if there's more than $500,000 in federal expenditures, the federal grant schedule that is abstracted from the grant schedule information provided is required to have an opinion that is separate from the one that we provide for your financial statements. The Federal Office of Management and Budget Circular A133, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, requires, as one of the conditions of receiving federal grants, a grant schedule. A grant schedule that you take responsibility for is also required in our accounting and financial reporting regulation manual. As Tammy was talking about the regulatory reports, we have a manual for that too. And in there it will talk about the grant, how it needs to be reported. And it probably wouldn't hurt you to take a look at the manual, know that it's available. It's on our website at www.in.gov/SBoA under our manuals. If your county expended less than $500,000 in federal, it's important that we be able to identify the sources of the funding that your county is receiving, and this is in order for us to be better able to make risk assessments for audit purposes. And we also have found through experience that sometimes grants that are not identified as federal grants, they do turn out to be federal. And sometimes we're able to just kind of see that when we're looking through the schedules that you developed, that yes, this is really federal sourced funding. It's also information that helps the public and legislators understand how much of your funding is from sources other than taxes and fines and fees. And in Gateway, this is one of the reports that can be generated. They can click on and they can actually generate a grant schedule. The report generated from Gateway is unaudited information, and it's stated that way. But unaudited or not, this is still information that's put out by your county. It's representative of your county, and I know you want it to be as correct as possible. So let's start with the very basic. You need to have a policy and process in place to gather the information that you need. The policy needs to be formal and disseminated to all those who would be affected. So right now, a lot of times it's pretty informal. You contact them in January and February and you go, help, I need this information. So this really means that you need to disseminate the information to all your offices and departments. You might already feel like there's a grant approval process in place and that all, the grants have to be approved by your commissioners and that they'll have a copy and that that's really kind of a central depository for your grants. But really there's two issues. Well, there's probably more than that, but one is, do they really approve all the grants? I mean, you and they might really think that they do, but we have found time and again where grants have been made with an office or department. They even might have a separate bank account out there and keeping their own records, which that has not occurred very often, but we've found it. And obviously, they haven't gone through the commissioners on this. Also, some offices, such as the prosecutors and judges, they might not necessarily go through the approval process. The other issue is that while the commissioners may, in fact, approve all the grants in your county, most likely they're not going to have the information that you're going to need for the grant schedule. The bottom line is that you need to have a process that ensures that you receive the complete information that you need, and one that every office and department in your county understands is crucial to them to participate in. So it's important that you have that formal policy that requires each department to provide certain information to you upon approval of a grant, regardless of who approves that grant. You might make this as a condition before they get a fund number or something. I mean, they've got to work with you, no matter which office it is, to have this grant. So you do have some sway over them. And you might also want to let them know that this is statutory requirement under our statute for the annual report, what we require under IC 5-11-1-4, and also that for them to receive federal funding, that's a requirement under the OMB Circular A133. That way, those who might have some issues with giving you the information, they might be a little bit more persuaded that this is to their benefit. And of course, policy is not a process, but is part of a process. Our auditors, when they go out, they look to see how this policy is implemented. You'll want to have a system in place whereby you disseminate the information, as I said before. You might want to do something like email the policy out by email to offices and departments a couple of times a year. When you have a new head of a department come in, you might want to go ahead. You'll know when that happens usually, and so you'll want to go ahead and make this part of the information that they know that they have to provide to you. By having your process in place like this, we can also tell that if you've tried to communicate with a department and you've sent emails, etc., and they've not responded, yet we find out later on that they've got a grant, then we'll know more where to even point our finding at. So it is important that you have documented evidence of what your process is that you're doing. So what is the information that you'll need? Requiring copies of the grant agreement is a start, but it's only a start. I'm sure that, again, if you've relied on pulling some of the information from the grant agreement and at an annual report time, you've already discovered that it's really kind of a mad scramble to get all that information. I would suggest that in addition to maintaining a copy of the grant agreement, that you have a sheet that provides the information that you know you'll need. That way you won't have to scramble around trying to figure it out. I've provided a sample of that, of one that I believe either will provide you with the information you need at a glance or that you can use to build from that. And this way you could put this in front of a file that holds the copy of the grant agreement, and you'll know that you have that information that you need. This is something that either you could fill out as you receive a grant copy or something that you could have the person who's in charge of the grant provide to you as part of your process to fulfill your policy. And it could be a combination, and a lot of times it probably will be a combination effort. If you go to your PowerPoint, you'll see that I have the grant summary information. I gave you a grant summary sheet that you could put in front of a file, but in your PowerPoint, I'm just going through it in step by step so that you can kind of make notes if you want to. Most of these items are going to sound familiar to you because that's what's been required in your grant schedule. So first is the local project name. That is the name used to locally identify the project. For many grants, this would be the same name as the formal grant name, but it may differ, especially if your county is trying to more clearly identify a local project. Award number, this is the number that the awarding agency has assigned to your grant and should be included in the award letter. Sometimes there is no award number. The best example I can give to you on that would be Title 4D grants. In those cases, you would leave that blank. Next is award name. This is the name that the awarding agency has assigned to your grant and should again be in the award letter. The next slide is award method. The award method is simply how that the awarding agency is providing the funding to the county. The method most commonly used is grant reimbursement, where the grantee, you would expend its fund, your own funds first, and then based on these expenditures, request reimbursement from the awarding agency. The other more common grant is where the money is advanced to you and then expended by you. And here, usually, you have to provide reports to your grantor agency explaining what you've done. Neither of these were clearly identified on the grant schedule you provided in the past, but with this next one, that's going to be one of the changes that's made. There will be an indicator that will identify the grant as whether it's an advance payment to the unit or if it was a reimbursement to you. Identifying which of these two methods is used is crucial because what you show as expenditure on the grant schedule for these different kinds of grants are different. For advance, you'll show the expenditures as they occur, and what's reflected in your fund activity as an expenditure will be reflected on your grant schedule. For grant reimbursement, the amount shown as expenditure on the grant schedule will actually be the amount reimbursed. This is really a more conservative approach of what you expend and request for reimbursement, because reimbursements may not be fully, what you've asked for may not be fully reimbursed. In the fall, we will have a grant portion, and because we got some of these updates that are going to be occurring in the gateway, and so we'll go over some detailed examples of how to fill out the grant schedule with all the different kinds of fundings there. And for today, we'll just concentrate on the information that you should be gathering. It's usually very clear in the award letter which of these two methods are going to occur, whether it's the advance or the reimbursement, and then I have listed as other. And you might actually get a combination of other along with the advance or reimbursement, which I'll talk about here. For example, the grant may not be in the form of cash, but may be non-cash. This could be something like immunization. There used to be distributions of food. On the summary sheet, I've indicate other than C note. So I would put under notes non-cash, and since you will have to put on the grant schedule the fair market value at the time of the receipt of the non-cash, you might want to include that in the notes section so that you have that readily available. Sometimes you will receive a cash and a non-cash under the same award, and you can indicate that if it's a reimbursement and other, then explain it in your notes section. Sometimes, and this is even rarer, are loans from federal programs. Economic development is one of those that typically might have loans made that we will see occasionally. Overall, it is somewhat rare, but you do need to have somewhere that you could indicate that. There also may be program income, which again is a little bit more on the rare side. This can happen when there's an advance, and the advance is great enough to generate some interest income. Typically with cash management, that should not be an issue. With some programs, there are fees generated, and those fees are recognized as program income in the agreement. And one that many of the counties have, or at least a few of you, is what Tammy mentioned, and that's the fees based on work done by the prosecutors, that PCA fund that she was talking about. The twist here is that the income is sent to the Department of Child Services, and then Department of Child Services is sending the Title IV-D income to you. It is accounted for differently in the grant schedule, and we'll get into that in the fall. And the Title IV-D will be an example of what you do because it has both reimbursement, advances, and program income. Next, we have fund name and number. This is what you are using in your accounting system. Remember, if it is federal, then the fund name should start with a CFDA number. Next, we have initiating office, contact name, phone number, and email. And of course, this is invaluable to you if you have any questions. And it'd be great to have it just right there in front of you so that you can call that person who had the gall to go and ask for this grant and not give you the information. Hey, give me this. pass-through agency. Most county grants are from the state, so this would be the name of the state agency, which again would be in the grant agreement or other entity if you get something from another entity. So if this is a direct award by the feds, then you just put their name in it. It would also be good for you to have the contact name and contact information from there. There's times when it's just better for you to talk with them directly. Again, Title 4D is one of those examples where you've had lots of communication with DCS directly instead of the prosecutor and the clerk, because their concentration is on program information and not the financial side of things. Is this a federal grant? Many of the grants that the counties receive are federal, if not most, and it should be identified as such in the grant agreement. And obviously, if it's a direct grant from the federal government, it will be there, you'll know it. But even if it's from another entity, such as a state, it should clearly identify that the funding source originated with state funding or federal funding, or a combination of the two, which that does occur a lot. So if the grant agreement does not specify, don't assume. You can't possibly know what the real funding source or sources are if it's not clear in that agreement, or what the combination is, if there is a combination. So get in touch with them. Ask them, was the money passed through to you originating with state funding or part of a federal program? If it's a combination of several funding sources, then ask them to be clear on which funding sources have been passed through to you in what dollar combination. I've seen where state agencies, on purpose, were not clear because they didn't know how they wanted to work their funding. But that doesn't help you any because you are responsible for that grant schedule. So force them to be clear on that. And I would ask them to provide that in an email communication with you so that you have documented evidence of why that you've put what percentage with the federal versus state funding. And I would even go so far as to tell my auditors when they came in, because it is good for us to know when we go and audit state agencies, if we have a particular state agency that is not clearly identifying the funding sources to you. Same with the federal agency name, federal program name, and CFDA number. These should be clearly addressed in the grant agreement. If not, you need to contact the grantor and find out what the appropriate name, program name, and CFDA number are. If you get a grant agreement that tries to abbreviate, saying something like juvie grant or something like that, there are a zillion federal grants that are for juveniles. So you really need to have the correct name and the CFDA number. And again, if it isn't clear, I would get something, an email or something that's clarifying why that you are calling it that particular name, just not somebody over the phone saying, well, it's this. Last year, Tammy provided to you a list of the most common grants that are received by local units. That's the one that has a program at the top. I know things get lost, so I wanted to provide you with this because this is something that would be good to keep with a packet so that you have that readily available. It has the grants with their proper names and their CFDA numbers, so I think it's one helpful resource for you to have available. You can also go online at www.cfda.gov, which is where the catalog of federal assistance is maintained, and again, you can get your information from there. But again, the most important source to get that from would be your grantor agency. Let's see. Another thing is the pass-through to subrecipients. And this is another area that you need to make sure that you have on your grant schedule. I've provided to you, it's entitled Vendor and Subrecipients, because sometimes that is really difficult to understand what it is. I mean, if you're buying certain things with federal funds, you know, I'm getting typewriters, I'm getting computers or whatever it is I'm getting, then you know right away, okay, it's a vendor that you're giving the money to. And then if you're passing it on to somebody to actually implement part of the program, that's really clear. But there are certain cases where it could be either way, and that's what these questions or what these characteristics that are listed through here will help you to understand. You just kind of go through them. It still might not be really clear, but at least it kind of gives you a guideline. And ultimately, you are going to have to make the decision, and hopefully that decision was made up front. Because again, just like the state should be providing you with information, like if it's federal number or a federal grant, the CFD number, that type of thing, that's something that you too need to be providing as a county. And so that determination, whether it's the subrecipient or a vendor, should have been made at that time. Sometimes it's not, though. And if it's one of the questions that you have, then maybe you can prevent some heartache at a later date on something that you should have been monitoring properly. So that's another thing that you should have in your packet. Let's see. So I think I'm going to let you go ahead and read through that yourselves. I'm sure that you'll be able to work on that. Anyway, I'm just going to leave you with the thought that by the time we get together again in the fall, you'll have a nice summary of all your grants, and you'll have nice little folders all ready, and so then we'll be able to talk about, okay, this is how, now that we include the expenditures, what kind of expenditures. There will be more information that we're requesting. We will also be including receipts this time, not just the expenditure information, so be aware of that too. So hopefully we'll come in and you'll go, oh, no big deal. We'll just be able to snap that grant schedule right out.